upon the winch of the Order of the True Shrine. In this place, we gather the remains of those who were separated and forgotten, so we can grant them holy burial as our charitable rule prescribeth.
Something that I couldn't stop thinking about once completing Blasphemous was the tragic story of the young girl Tentudia. Her death, although occurring several years before the penitent one's journey began, displays how the innocent can be unfairly punished by the miracle. What was it about this particular side quest that stuck so closely to me? And why was it that after a couple of hours of research, I discovered a potentially huge subplot that led me to speculate that this long deceased girl perhaps was meant to play a key role in the penitent one's holy quest? Oh, I know I'm reaching, and all of this is going to be pure speculation, but as I found out, it all fits a little too well if you ask me. So, if you're interested in watching some random guy on the internet talk about a side quest from a 3-year-old video game, you've come to the right place. Just like any wise penitent, I am inclined to inform you that there will be major spoilers in this video, so if you find yourself wanting to finish the game first, I highly encourage you to do so, then maybe come back. With that being said, let's get started. As of now, the story of Blasphemous has come to an end after the events of the final DLC release, Wounds of Eventide, setting up for the second installment, releasing hopefully next year. So I'm hopeful that certain things that I cover here don't become invalidated in the sequel, but just like the miracle, life is capricious and penance never ends, making your boy here spend all this time for naught. Let's begin with how the quest is initially acquired. In the city of Albero, there is a church. When you approach what appears to be a window, an unseen man by the name of Ludovico informs you that here they collect and gather the scattered remains of people in order to provide them a decent burial to ensure they cross over into the other side of the dream. They are called the Order of the True Shrine. So from here on out, this side quest has now been initiated and you have the option to look for these remains or to just move forward with the main story. Personally, my first assumption after the dialogue was that I was going to find several people whose remains were scattered across the world and then in return receive some kind of currency or reward. However, I wasn't entirely correct. Though you do receive some currency when providing a missing remain, and a pretty cool prayer that I'll cover more in detail later, the truth is that you are essentially only discovering the remains of just one person, and that particular person is Tentudia. Now, throughout the game you acquire different relics that grant you different abilities in specific locations in order to gain you access to hard to reach areas, such as the Blood Perpetuated in Sand relic that allows you to use blood platforms, or the 3 gnarled tongues that turns roots into footbridges or climbable surfaces. Once you obtain these relics, you should be able to find and reach the areas to obtain the remains. However, I'm not going to specify how you acquire these relics. I might cover those in a different video, since covering them now would heavily steer my point off an already unstable road of constructed theories. So I'm going to focus on the actual 3 remains of Tentudia and the lore behind them. The order of obtaining them isn't necessarily linear depending on your exploration path, but I'm going to cover them in order according to the lore. So first is Tentudia's carnal remains, which can be found in the wasteland of the buried churches and will require the Blood Perpetuated in Sand relic in order to get to them. The description reads, "Who was Tentudia, you ask? Well, she was once a girl born in this very yellowish village of Albero, like you and me. On her 15th year, something extremely unusual happened. Her parents watched as part of her hair began twisting, unavoidably turning into very thin thorns. Concerned with the thought that it might be a punishment from the miracle, they locked her in as a novice inside a distant nunnery, famous for its strict cloistering, thus preventing the discovery of what would have, undoubtedly, been considered heresy. So in short, this poor girl's hair started becoming thorns, and due to the parents not understanding and assuming that this is a punishment from the miracle, they decided to send her off to a nunnery and hide her. I mean, the intention to help her was there. It's possible that this could have been handled better, but due to the ongoing circumstances of things going bad in the town and the whole miracle blessing / cursing people left and right, they really didn't have a choice. So they did what they thought was best and opted in to send her to a nunnery, not to fix her, but to hide her and ultimately keep her safe. Also, it's speculated that the convent where she was sent to was perhaps the convent of Our Lady of the Charred Visage, but I don't think so, and I will cover that a bit later as well. The second item is the remains of Tentudia's hair, which can be found where the olive trees wither. And luckily, you don't need any special relic to obtain it. It reads, Tentudia spent several years in that nunnery, and as she grew up, it became harder and harder to hide her hair. It wouldn't stop twisting and growing thorns, and blood from the wounds it caused her did not take long to stain her pure white habit. The nuns, upon realizing, were frightened by it and soon began considering her cursed and a heretic, just as the parents of the girl had feared would happen. So now years have passed by, and the poor girl is continuing to grow thorns out of her head, to the point where they are now physically hurting her and causing her to bleed profusely, revealing this very obvious condition to the rest of the nunnery, which would unfortunately seal this poor girl's fate. I mean, it's heartbreaking. She literally had to carry this burden with no one helping her for years, along with learning and practicing the strict responsibilities of a nun. She had no say in her life, and ultimately became a prisoner for something that was entirely out of her control. The third and final item, Tentudia's skeletal remains, are located in the Graveyard of the Peaks, and you are going to need both the blood perpetuated in sand relic and the 3 gnarled tongues relic. It reads, the nuns planned her execution in utmost secrecy, even without a trial or a report to the church, in fear it would reach the ears of the implacable inquisitors of the miracle. So after her condemnation, they did not give her the proper burial worthy of the sisters of the nunnery, but instead buried the remains of her body scattered around the vicinity, because it is known that if one's body is not whole in the burial, the soul will not cross through the dream. After obtaining the final remain, Ludovico can now perform a second, true burial that will allow her soul to find peace. As a final reward, he bestows upon you the Debla of the Light's prayer, a prayer that according to him will ensure Tentudia watches over the penitent one. And man, does it ever. When used, a beam of holy light surrounds the penitent one, along with inflicting hefty amounts of damage to enemies nearby. Before I go any further, I would like to briefly discuss the actions of the nunnery. Although unjust and cruel, it can be safe to assume that the nuns carried out this deed to primarily protect themselves from any kind of punishment. Why else would they carry out a carefully planned execution along with a very labor-intensive post-death ritual if it weren't for their overall safety? I'd like to think that the nuns aren't necessarily all purely evil, but instead are similar to the many people in Custodia. They are victims to the miracle and were conditioned to abide by it and its power. Which leads me to speculate on why I don't believe that the nunnery that she was sent to was the convent of Our Lady of the Charred Visage. This particular convent has very strict requirements for its new members. One of them was the long and perilous journey that one must undertake to get to the convent, climbing the dangerous snowy mountains where many have died from the cold and other factors. This would make it near impossible for her parents to just send her so haphazardly. Another mandate for new members is once reaching the convent, you are obligated to burn your face with hot oil in order to then wear a golden mask, emulating the pious actions of the founder of the convent. No golden mask or burning oil was ever mentioned in Tentudia's lore. However, the main reason why I believe that she wasn't sent to this particular convent is a substantial detail that is mentioned in the lore description of Tentudia's skeletal remains, which reads, "They did not give her the proper burial worthy of the sisters of the nunnery, but instead buried the remains of her body scattered around the vicinity." Keyword being vicinity. 2 of the items are found quite far from the convent of the Charred Visage. While yeah, one of them is relatively close, but nonetheless somewhat far from its source. which leads me to speculate that the nunnery that she was sent to no longer exists, and that's because it was located outside of the skirts of Albero, in the area that we know now as the wasteland of the buried churches. This particular area is what it sounds like, a graveyard of all the previously existing churches that perhaps fell during the age of the turned throne. During this period of time, His Holiness Escobar literally turned his back and throne on his congregation due to the pleas not being answered by the miracle, essentially losing his faith in it. Sometime later, he was transformed into an enormous tree that towered over the Cathedral of the Mother of Mothers, then later spontaneously combusting from the inside out. The tree burned for 90 days, leaving this huge pile of ash that ended up resting beneath that mentioned turned throne. At this point, the miracle drove priests and parishioners to attempt to climb the ash and reach the turned throne, but all of them were swallowed by the ash, and then transforming those who failed this endeavor into the hordes of the miracle, or the punished. Among them was Escobar, reborn as the last son of the miracle. The timeline of Tentudia's existence is another thing that really isn't specified and would probably help to determine if the nunnery was indeed located where I assume it was. However, there really isn't much to go on, so let's keep using that magic word that would probably go bankrupt if it were sponsoring this video. I came up with this very basic timeline according to the major events that happened in Custodia, coinciding with the story of Tentudia, along with another interesting theory on why I believe that nunnery was located in the graveyard of the buried churches. Tentudia is born in the city of Albero, perhaps into a family devoted to the miracle. At the age of 15, she is affected by the miracle's punishment and begins growing thorns from her head. She is sent to the nunnery that is located somewhere where the graveyard is now encompassed. She is killed by the nuns and her remains are scattered across the vicinity of the church. The era of the turned throne takes place, leading many of the churches to perhaps lose their faith in Escobar and the miracle, creating some kind of issues within many churches, leading them to perhaps dissipate and become abandoned. Among all the churches that would fall, a few try to keep their doors open to the people in order for them to reinforce the will of the miracle, which could include that particular nunnery. That is when the miracle begins to influence many of the priests and parishioners, which would include nuns, to climb the mountains of ash in order to obtain the turned throne. However, they fall into the ash, becoming monsters. Real quick, this is where that crazy theory I mentioned a bit ago comes into place. I would like to turn your attention to the kind of monsters that majorly inhabit the area. The crucified, which I always had my suspicion of them being women, which is confirmed in the art book. How, you might ask? Well, Spanish is a language where all nouns have a specified gender. Not to go too in depth with a Spanish lesson, but usually nouns that end with an O are considered masculine, while nouns that end with an A are considered feminine. The art book is written in both English and Spanish, offering a very well articulated translation. In the section where the author discusses the enemies of Blasphemous, this particular monster, in Spanish, is referred to as crucificada, implying that the gender of this particular monster is female. So, with that established, I believe that these female creatures are the remnant transformations of nuns that most likely served in nearby convents. And if you want to further speculate, according to the wiki, they are being tied to a particular set of statues by bramble, which are a type of small thorny-like vines. This may have been used by the miracle as some kind of ironic punishment for killing an innocent girl that had thorns growing from her hair. But that's again pure speculation. Anyways, back on track. Finally, at the end of this timeline, the penitent one arrives in order to fulfill the miracle's plan of crowning a new father. This was the overall plan of the miracle, according to ending A, where the penitent one succeeds on his holy quest and reaches the throne among the ashes. The miracle orchestrated several of the events of the penitent one's quest in order to help him achieve father status. So, now you might be asking, hey, that's all fine and dandy, but how was Tentudia meant to play a bigger role? Well, for one, I think she wasn't meant to be executed by the nuns. If maybe left alive, she would have turned into some kind of helpful entity such as Nacimiento or Soledad. but unfortunately she is deceased and cannot help us in life, so she helps us in death. Prayers, as we know, are very powerful tools in the game. They all serve a special purpose that can help you in a very precarious situation, ranging from increasing the penitent one's offense or reinforcing his defense. Whatever the situation may entail, they can be very useful. At this point, I would like to refer back to the Debla of the Lights prayer that Ludovico bestowed upon us. If I may be so bold, I would like to speculate that this is perhaps the strongest prayer in the game, in the sense that it deals a substantial amount of damage to an enemy, along with having a decent amount of range, almost a third of the screen to be exact. However, that is not what defines it as the most powerful prayer. When equipped with certain rosary beads and well-timed attacks, it can easily take down the second form of Escribar by evoking the prayer only 6 times. That is ridiculously quick. That's what makes it the most powerful prayer. Tentudia's heavenly light ever so present to make sure that the penitent one's obstacles are removed, while keeping him safe from a distance. And if you need more proof that this girl had some greater purpose, there is a second prayer that features her and her holy protection. This prayer is known as the Tiento to your thorned hair, and is obtained after you complete Cleophas's rebirth side quest. This particular prayer is tricky to obtain due to the fact that you can easily botch the side quest. Not to go too much into detail, but basically you have to find a secret room where Socorro and Cleophas are located. Socorro is a young lady who asks the miracle to redirect people's pain unto herself in order to show them mercy. She is now bound to an altar with open wounds and scars, where Cleophas, an ex-member of the Order of the True Burial, is there worshipping her due to the fact that she is continuously receiving pain for others, a true living martyr where death is replaced with torture. If done correctly, you will be gifted the prayer that was transcribed by Cleophas when worshipping Socorro. What does this prayer do? And is it as powerful as the previous one? Well, it's not as powerful when it comes to taking an offensive strategy. It's the opposite, providing the ultimate defense, because when you use this prayer, it makes you invincible for a short amount of time. That's right, no enemy damage of any kind can hurt you. Tentudia the young girl can be seen protecting you every single time an enemy tries to hurt you. Of course, you are still vulnerable to such instant death traps like spikes or the bottomless pit outside the screen. So the two strongest prayers are both correlated with this young girl that was wrongfully executed a long time ago. I believe that the miracle chose Tentudia as some kind of emissary for the penitent one, or perhaps if you want to go full tinfoil hat, maybe Tentudia was meant to be the next great leading figure of the church. I mean, thorns that form on someone's head can easily be reshaped into a crown, and where else have you seen a holy being with a crown of thorns? Anyways, that's reaching too far, and I feel my shoulder popped out of its socket doing that. I, of course, don't know if the developers meant for this particular side quest to have this hidden depth, or if the character of Tentudia would have this much meaning, since there isn't much that I could find on this character besides this piece of art in the art book, and the short summaries on the wiki. So I decided to do my own research on the name Tentudia, and I came across several articles on the web that mostly talked about the same thing, a Tentudia monastery located in Spain, named after a virgin saint. Thus leading me to continue my very amateur Googling skills, discovering that the Saint Tentudia has a very interesting legend. To summarize a very complex story that varies in telling according to different sources, during the 1240s, a Portuguese Christian conqueror by the name of Don Pelayo Pérez Correa led a battle against the Muslims. While trying to gain a strategic advantage, he realized that the sun was soon going to set and that there wouldn't be enough time to execute his plan. So, he did what any man with a devoted faith would do, and that is call to the heavens for aid. He called out to the Virgin Mary and exclaimed, "Holy Mary, stop your day," thus stopping the day, providing more daylight, and earning the Christians the victory in battle. Pretty straightforward, and yet it doesn't necessarily tie it with the Virgin Saint Tentudia, does it? Well, that's because the English translation doesn't do it justice. If it were read in Spanish, however, it would definitely make more sense. Luckily, I speak Spanish, and when doing research using that particular language, man, does this thing wrap up nicer than a baby with a 4-foot blanket. The plea of Pelayo when exclaiming to the heavens, "Holy Mary, stop your day," translates to Santa Maria de Tentudia. That's right, the last 2 words and a half of the first word is what became a name. Not only did it become a name, it created a holy figure that is now known to have helped a person in need with holy light. Does that sound familiar? And to this day, the Virgin Tentudia is worshipped as a holy being that also provides protection. Again, does that sound familiar? But I digress. I wasn't raised in this particular area of Spain, nor am I Spanish, so I wouldn't know the detailed legends and stories that might be told to the actual native residents of the area. I am sure that I probably made mistakes on portraying this story, and for that I am truly sorry, and I'm completely open to criticism, and I highly implore you to let me know otherwise in the comments down below. I really enjoyed doing this research and making all these loose ends tie up somehow. It might have not gone as smooth as I expected, and I sure do feel like I strayed away from the path of continuity, but I always find stories with great lore fascinating. Real or fiction, it doesn't matter, as long as there is passion from the storyteller and a driving force that pushes you to think. If you made it this far, I would like to thank you so much. I know that I bounced all over the place and maybe didn't get to where I needed to go in a very smooth manner, but nonetheless, I thank you. This being my first video, I am open for feedback and I would highly appreciate any constructive criticism or advice that you may give. I go by Mantimech, and I'll see you in the next one.